Okay, I've got my tabernacle locker all sanded up, and I also sanded my my knees and blended the fiberglass into the surrounding wood along the edges as best I could. I didn't bother taking the glass any higher than that because the side deck is going to tie this whole piece in, so there's really not a need to glass all the way up, and it's just really hard to sand. So I didn't bother doing that. And the next thing I'm going to do is plane down my deck beams, and I've taken my straight edge here and I can lay it across to see where I need to plane. So obviously I have a gap up here. Alright, you can see the aftermath here. I've now got, my camera will zoom, meeting on all three beams at the proper angle. Pretty close there, you know, not exactly right, but very, very close. Okay, here's the three main deck beams fitted between the thwartship bulkhead beams, and you want to make sure you run a straight edge across the back side of the forward bulkhead and make sure that it's still straight across the top. You may have to adjust the length of these beams to keep that bulkhead straight. And also I had a little split out here. I got a little enthusiastic with my hammer, and I split that out, but it's hanging on by a little thread of fiberglass, so I'll just glue it back up in place when I glue the beam in. So next I'm going to go ahead and glue these in. When I mix epoxy, I keep the cup that I mixed in so that I can come back the next day and A, make sure that it actually kicked off the way it should, and B, I can usually just peel the hardened epoxy right out of the cup and reuse it. The next thing I want to do is glue in the tabernacle. And before I do that, I'm going to drill out the hole for the 1/4-inch bolt that is the locking bolt at the base of the mast, the main mast. And that bolt needs to be perpendicular to the bottom of the mast, and the mast sits in the tabernacle at a 3-degree aft angle of rake. And so to accomplish that on my drill press, I have clamped it to the base of my table and wedged it up on this end. And if you work out the trigonometry on 3 degrees of angle, you'll see that it's very close to 1 inch of rise in 20 inches of run. And so here I've halved that, so I have a tick mark at 10 inches on the tabernacle from the bottom of the tabernacle, and I have chalked that up to 1/2 inch above my drill press table, and that will give me a 3-degree angle to this hole. So I'm going to go ahead and drill that. So now we have our hole drilled, and the next thing is to glue in the tabernacle. And now we come to the part that a lot of people dread: how to align the tabernacle so that the mast is straight and has the proper amount of rake. Well, step one is to make sure that the boat is level. I'm holding the tabernacle in with a little push stick against the tabernacle bulkhead, and I'm going to do all the alignment of the tabernacle with just one tool, my level. And the first thing I'm going to check the tabernacle for is plumb. So I'm going to hold it up against the side of the tabernacle and check it for plumb, flipping the level over to make sure there's no errors in this plumb bubble. And once I get it plumb, I'm going to make a darker mark down here so I can see that better. And we know that our tabernacle bulkhead is plumb. If you don't know that it's plumb, you should double check it, and you may have to put a small sliver of wood either at the top or the bottom to plumb the tabernacle. And if you want to double check that, you can put the level against the back side of the tabernacle and check to see if that is plumb. The next thing we need to do is check the angle of the tabernacle in relation to the mizzen mast. So if I hold my level like an aiming sight and I just press it up against the inside face of the tabernacle and I sight down it, I can see that we are going to intersect the mizzen mast. And so if I tried to lower the main mast right now, all I would do is clobber the mizzen mast. Down on this end, I've got just a piece of scrap wood stuck in the mizzen mast hole, and I plumbed it so that I can have something to sight against. And so how are we going to fix that? Well, we're going to wedge the tabernacle on this edge ever so slightly to give it some twist. And what that's going to do is allow the main mast, as it comes down, it's going to allow the main mast to come down beside the mizzen mast as opposed to right on top of it. So let me get those pieces in place and I'll show you what I mean. There's a couple different ways to do this. The way I'm going to do it is with two thin little strips of wood that I ripped on the table saw, about 1/16 of an inch thick, and you can rip a few different sizes and then experiment. You can keep dry fitting until you're happy with it. But I've got two of them here because I've already done the dry fit. But all I'm going to do is put them up against this edge, and I've got a piece of painter's tape to hold them in place. I can do this with one hand. And those little strips are what is going to wedge my tabernacle so that my main mast won't hit my mizzen mast. So I'm gonna wedge the tabernacle back in place, and then we'll look at it again. Okay, I've re-wedged the tabernacle in, and now I have those strips behind the tabernacle. There, you can see them from the top. And you can also see the angle that that's created on the tabernacle. So now, if I re-plumb my tabernacle, you have to re-plumb it every time. If I re-plumb it, we're plumb. Now I can use the level again as a sight. And so I'm putting my level up against the inside edge of the tabernacle there. And now when I sight down it, I just clear the mizzen mast. I hope you can see that. So now when I rotate the level, I'm coming down on the outside edge. That's the side closer to the center board. I'm missing the mizzen mast. So with that wedge in place, we know that the main mast will not interfere with the mizzen mast when it's lowered. We know that the tabernacle is plumb. We know that the tabernacle bulkhead is plumb, and therefore our 3-degree mast rake is built in. So that is exactly how I'm going to glue the tabernacle in, and I'm going to do that now. Okay, I'm finally satisfied that I've got it glued in the proper position, and don't settle for anything less than 100% squeeze out. If the epoxy doesn't squeeze out of all sides on this piece, pull it off and reapply the epoxy, thicker if need be, and push it back down. And if double check is good, quadruple check is better. So I checked it a bunch of times, and I'll probably check it again in 5 minutes just because I'm paranoid about it. But you can't really mess this up if you have an accurate level and you leveled the boat properly and you plumbed your bulkhead. That's about it. I've cleaned up the squeeze out now, and I've also added in these 1/4 inch thick doubler blocks that effectively increase the bonding area of the base of the tabernacle to prevent any possibility of the bottom of the tabernacle moving. I just pushed those down with some epoxy and put a small fillet around them. And so, as you can see, it really wasn't all that bad. I have since double checked that everything's in alignment, and once that kicks off, we're gonna continue on. I'm gonna get a coat of epoxy on this today. After it gels up, I can take these supports out. I'm gonna get these last little beams in the tabernacle locker. Okay, on to the next job. I'm trying to wrap up the last few little tasks in the cockpit before I can put in my primer, and one of those is to finish up the mast step for the mizzen mast. So we're here at the aft thwart, and this is the actual thwart top, and it fits in right like that. And we've gone to using plywood for the thwarts because all the pieces can be cut on the machine, and the only thing that the builder has to do is fit these two hardwood beams. Everything else is cut on the machine. But if you like the old style thwart, some people like to do the quarter sawn strip thwart with and varnish it and make it look nice. You can do that. You just cut this piece off the seat top. You would not use this little edge, and you could do the old style thwart, but we've gone to this because it's easier to build. And so one of the things that we need to add is some mast support pieces. So I've cut these parts out yesterday. This piece slots into here, and look at that, I haven't even sanded it, and it fits right in there. This piece is a doubler, 3/4 inch doubler for the mizzen mast, and it's going to get glued in between the thwart beams flush with the top. And this piece here is the mast base, and normally in the 17 and in the 20 the mizzen mast base is made out of a couple of layers of this shape of block, and they go down here on top of the keel batten, and they're reinforced with some screws into the keel batten and glued in. But I like to put a fiberglass tube between here and there, so that when you drop the mizzen mast in, there's no chance of you jumping out of the mast hole. So because I'm going to be doing a fiberglass tube, I'm only going to use one thickness of 3/4 inch ply, and that will get glued to the thwart, to the keel batten, and I'm going to put 4 stainless steel screws in as reinforcement, and then I will be gluing in a fiberglass tube from here to there. And I've got my lower section of mast here. This is not the entire mast, this is just the lower section. It's very lightweight, probably weighs all of, I don't know, 4 pounds. And so if I put that in place, you can see this hole is sloppy because I've cut it to size for a fiberglass tube. So I'm gonna pack that out real quick. Okay, all I've done is wrap a layer of this packaging cardboard around the mast with a piece of tape, and now that keeps the mast concentric to this hole, but now it's a snug fit. So I'm gonna put this back into position. And there we go. So now with that packing in there, the mast is really stiff because the cardboard is holding the mast in that hole in a concentric fashion. And what I'm gonna do now, the goal of this is to locate this mast base fore and aft and side to side to make sure the mast goes in plumb. So this piece I'm gonna mark top and aft so that it goes in the same way later on, and it's butted snug up against the side of the trunk, and obviously it's directly over the keel batten, and so we want to make sure that this hole and this hole are plumb, and we want to set the 3-degree rake. So the first thing we're going to do is get it plumb. So I've got my level, and I'm gonna use the level to measure for plumb and make any adjustments down here, and I'll probably need to scoot it out a hair. I've radiused that under corner for this fillet. I've used a mini grinder to radius that, and I've ran around here with a router as well. And then to set my rake, I have a 1-inch thick block, and I'm going to use that with my level to set the 3-degree rake, and I'll show you how to do that next. Okay, there is a 1-inch thick block, and I've taped it to the mast. It really is 1 inch. And I've also measured up the mast from the block 20 inches, and I put a piece of tape. And we know from trigonometry, as I mentioned before, that 3 degrees is very close to 1 inch in 20 inches. And so if I use my level and I put the top edge of the level there, and I rest the level on the block, and I read plumb, and I tilt the mast back until we're plumb, so right about close to there. Now we have our 3-degree mast rake set. So I'm going to fine tune that and do a little bit better job. Okay, we're plumb, resting at the top of my 20-inch mark, resting on my 1-inch block. I've got my mast base positioned, and I've checked for plumb athwartships this way. So I've held the level up to here. And what I'm going to do next is fire a screw in here and a screw in there. I'm going to just drill the holes and put a drywall screw to mark the location. I've also drawn a pencil line so that it doesn't move on me. Okay, with those 2 screws in, the mast base is positioned, and we know we're going to have the 3-degree rake, and we know that we are plumb athwartships. And before I glue this down, I'm going to put a drain hole in it, and I keep some marbles around, and this one wants to roll forward right here. So I think what I'm going to do is put a drainage channel on the underside of this thwart so that water will drain out from the front. So I'm going to cut that with a router, and then I'll glue this down. If you're really paranoid about your 2 masts being parallel, you can clamp a straight edge, as I've done, to the tabernacle, and if you stand back from the boat, oh, this is going to show up really well on camera, you can see that dark line. That is the difference in angle between the mizzen and the main mast, and look at how it just disappears at exactly the same moment. So if you use your level correctly, I guarantee you it will be accurate. So trust your level, flip it over so you cancel out any errors, but that is spot on. So we know that the mizzen mast and the main mast are going to go up straight and parallel. Here's my mast base with the drainage channel cut in it. This channel faces the front of the boat, and I also have this little scrap of 1/4 inch fuel hose, and I put some Vaseline on it, and what I'm going to do is actually try to bed this in there with thickened epoxy, and when it gels up I'm going to grab this with a pair of pliers and try to yank it out, and that will leave us a round drainage tube. And when I glue in the fiberglass tube, I'll cut a notch out of the bottom of it so that opens up that hole so that the fiberglass tube can drain. Another chore we're going to get done today is gluing the fiberglass bushings onto the smaller tubes. So here we have the main mast lower tube, mizzen mast lower tube. Those are 2.5 inch diameter. Then those join into these two, which are 2.25 inch diameter, and these join into those two, and these are 2 inch diameter. So on the smallest and the next to smallest, we're going to do a fiberglass bushing, and that's going to consist of 2 wraps of glass, one here and one there at 9 inches up, and we're just going to wrap it with glass. And the strips that I'm going to be wrapping it with happen to be 29 inches on both of them is what it came out as. And I've done this before where I put too much glass on, and it's really a pain in the butt to have to sand these down if you put too much glass on to fit into the bigger one. And so it's a lot easier to err on the smaller side because you can just put another wrap or 2 on after the fact. So anyway, I'm going to go with 29 inches. And I've also laid up 2 fiberglass wedges. These are 14 pieces of glass tapering in length, spaced about 1 inch. So 1 inch between pieces. So it's thickest at this end, about 3/16, and thinnest at that end with just 1 layer. I'm going to be laying these up on a very thin plastic, and once they're wet out, I'm going to be laying that plastic on top of the medium-sized tube and the smallest sized tube. The larger tube won't have one, and what these are going to do is create a ramp for the track, for the sail track to ride over the mast joint, and that'll make more sense later. But once these are hardened up, I'll sand them flat on top, and I will rip them in half, so each one of these will become 2 wedges, one for the main mast and one for the mizzen mast. Okay, here are all of our mast pieces finished, the bushings all glued up, and my wedges here. So we'll have a look at those tomorrow and see if we can't put some masts together.